next reader is Robert Haller, and he'll be reading another story.
Hello, everybody. I'll be reading two very short stories. The first one's called The Places He Hides. I've been living in that town for about 3 months, working on the reservation under a fake name. I had brought Vera with me because things were starting to become serious between us, I guess. And we lived in an apartment above a liquor store. I had given up on bars some years ago, so every Friday night when I got off from work, I would go downstairs to the liquor store and buy a bottle of vodka. Vera and I went through at least one bottle every weekend. The man who sold it to me was dark-skinned and friendly. He was the devil. He had long, thin fingers and milky blue eyes. When he spoke, he rolled his words out slow and accentuated, so every word was a long, cold caress. He told me he owned the store and lived in the back half of the building. Every time I came in, we'd end up talking about one thing or another: the weather, women, wars in foreign countries. I pretended it was no big deal, talking to the devil. I pretended he was just a regular guy. And sometimes I almost believed he was. It wasn't until weeks later that I began to suspect something wasn't right, that having the devil living under your floorboards might bring some sort of cost with it. I started to see these things, these connections between certain aspects of my life and my late night talks with the devil, like work. It became hard for me to keep my mind on it. I suffered from daydreams and a lack of energy. My boss was always on my back, and when he finally had enough and fired me, as I made the long walk back to town, tired and dejected, for some reason all I could think about was the devil's face, smiling serenely from behind the counter. Or the first time I hit Vera. She had been hysterical, crying, talking about how I needed to change. My hand had just sprung like a steel trap unhinged, as if on its own accord, striking her across the face. Pulling my hand back, red and still stinging from the impact, I knew this wouldn't have happened on its own. I knew that having that dark presence always under us as we ate dinner, when we watched TV, while we made love, was starting to pull us apart. At one point, I turned on the evening news, saw the dead bodies piled high, and thought, maybe all this in my life wasn't a coincidence. Maybe the devil was down there whispering things at strange times of night, causing all this slippage. I tried to stop going to him, but you have no idea what he's like, how he can get to you. I'd sit in my room at night after Vera had fallen asleep and feel him calling, feel his voice wrapping in coils around my body. It wasn't the alcohol that made me come back to him, which now I hardly thought about, drinking in large quantities but with no discernible alteration to my mind or body. I felt powerless every time I approached the counter, and he gave me that thin, knowing smile. Hate and rage would well up inside me, but I would have no way to convey it. I'd just nod and hand him my money. It wasn't until after Vera had left me, after my money had run out, after the whole world seemed to have collapsed, that I went to him intent on doing something. Why are you doing this to me? I demanded, slapping my hands down on the counter and bellowing. Why do you find such pleasure in destroying my life? What did I ever do to you? He just stared, a faint look of bewilderment and confusion in his pale blue eyes. So I hit him, hard across the face. He stumbled back, holding up his hands in a weak sign of surrender. I felt something rising, burning up inside me. Everything became a hazy mist. When it was over, there lay the devil, vanquished at my feet. He lay motionless, but I was shivering and shaking. What caused me to freeze, eyes wide, was what I saw running from the side of his head. Blood, thick and dark, spreading across the floor. Does the devil bleed? I knew then he'd had the last laugh, that just as I had dealt out my final revenge, he had flown, vanished into the night to some other hollow, some other place of darkness, and I was left here with this undeniable human form lying lifeless at my feet. Soon they would be after me. I've been on the road for some time now, hitching rides, hopping fences, sleeping under the stars. I've been looking for him. I've been trying to find the places he hides. Sometimes I think I see him at bus stops, in all-night diners, even in the clear reflections of certain icy rivers. But then I rub my eyes and he is gone again, swallowed into the ether, and I wonder if I will ever find him. This one's not so depressing. This is called The Promise. They sat together on the boardwalk, watching the moonlight dance and glisten over the surface of the dark water. On a sudden impulse, she grabbed his hand and whispered in his ear, "Promise me it'll always be like this. Promise me you'll never leave my side." He turned, gazed into her soft brown eyes and said, "My love, I will never leave your side." And he didn't. That night, when they went back to her apartment, he remained always within 3 feet of her. She didn't really notice it at first, as most of their time was spent in bed making love. But when she woke up at 2 a.m. with a parched throat and he insisted on going with her to the kitchen to get a glass of water, she couldn't help but find it a little odd. The next morning, he accompanied her into the bathroom. She tried explaining how she liked her privacy, but he would have none of it. "I made a promise," was all he'd say. He stood in the corner while she showered, combed her hair, brushed her teeth, flossed. She made him turn around when she used the toilet. Work was interesting. Her boss wasn't too happy with her new companion. "Something about the way he just sits there and stares at you makes my hair stand on end," he told her. But since he bought cup after cup of decaffeinated coffee, never taking his eyes off from where she stood behind the counter, he was a paying customer and therefore could not be shown to the door. She tried to break up with him that night. It didn't work. He accepted the fact that they were over, he said. He accepted even that she didn't love him anymore, but that did not, apparently, nullify his vow. "A promise is a promise," was all he'd say, sitting stoically on her couch. "I'm beginning to think you take things much too literally," she told him. Of course she went to the police eventually. He went too. She took legal action and obtained a restraining order with very little trouble, the evidence being right there by her side, which he immediately violated. After he had been led away by the police, she thought at last it was over. When she got back to her apartment to find him sitting at the kitchen table, reading the paper and eating a ham sandwich, she almost broke into tears. After a few years, she almost got used to him. Of course, having that presence always by her side made it hard for her to meet other men. When she went to the bars, they always assumed she was spoken for, and it practically destroyed any chance of a professional career beyond that of a barista. She would come to find that business managers were very particular about the number of people they hired. When they said one, they meant one. She lost a great deal of friends who said they just couldn't take having that silent figure forever present. "It's not you, it's him," they'd tell her. But besides all that, he was awfully quiet, only speaking when spoken to. And he always seemed to have an umbrella and was good at hailing cabs. Sometimes she almost forgot he was there at all.